we've got a group of companies who've all been affected who've come together. We've put just shy of £1 million together to effectively sue the HMRC. I'm a 100% supporter of protecting home steel manufacture. It is of national interest, but we need to do it in a constructive way where it listens to the whole industry. And it was very clear in their recommendations to Jonathan and the Department of Trade that if you didn't allow that deferment, there would be significant financial harm to the supply chain. So far, I've done a calculation and what I can see on the water and what's landed at UK ports, the bill is around £8 million.
You've had effectively a day to change the supply chain, which is ridiculous, really.
That to me is a perverse response, because what did they want us to do? Make no decisions. Everybody cleared an amount of material because it was the most efficient way to reduce the tariff that you were going to pay.
So what was the real issue? How did it become so problematic, Paul?
The real fundamental issue is why is the imported steel that has to travel halfway around the world cheaper than what we can produce in the UK?
The Metal Guys Talk Business podcast is brought to you by Compton Group, a specialist recruitment agency operating in the metals, engineering and manufacturing industry sectors. Enjoy the pod.
In today's podcast, we're joined by Paul Whitehouse, Managing Director of Steel and Alloy. This is a bonus podcast that we've recorded because of recent legislative changes which are going to massively impact the hot dip galvanised steel sector in the UK. Take a listen to the pod. We hope you enjoy the episode. Hey guys, Pete and Mike.
The Metal Guys.
Paul Whitehouse. Thanks for joining us so swiftly. I'd like you to start, really. You've got a bit of paper in front of you. Can you just give the listeners a bit of an idea of what that is and how that's come about?
Okay. Just for context, I'm not an expert.
Nor are we.
This is from my position and my opinion of the current situation. And what we want to talk about is the latest decision by the DBT to literally rip up the current tariffs and quota systems and make some very radical changes which affects the supply chain. So just to put it in context, because I just want to say what we're talking about, there are some categories which we don't deal with, the steel and alloy. So I'm the MD of Steel and Alloy. So I want to talk about category 4, because I know intimately what category 4 is all about, but I won't talk about the other categories. So just in case somebody wants to fact check me, I'm talking about category 4, which is coated steel in the main, which is galv coated steel. So just to make sure, some people will fact check me on some numbers or whatever, that I'm talking about that area, because that's where we've got some intimate knowledge about that area.
Let's roll back to the background then. So what's been going on to kind of set the scene of how what's just happened has happened? Why did it come in?
Let me go back just a little bit further than that, because I think the best way is to just explain the supply chain and how the supply chain has got where it is. So it's a long-established supply chain with regards to steel. And UK steel manufacture, like it or not like it, is a high-cost manufacturing base. And they've focused their capacity around high value added products in many service sectors, but predominantly in automotive. So, and then they've left the lower value added steel, commodity grade steels, to be imported. So that's the history, and that's been quite well established. And they've restricted their capacity, which helps them retain profitability to focus on those high value products. And that's created a supply chain which is long established, which is mainly from Far East supply or Asian supply into the UK for commodity grade products of coated steel. So that's the history, and that's established, and it's been well established for a long time. Then comes World Trade Organization, tariffs and quotas. So they were introduced as part of the EU legislation, actually, when we were part of the EU. We went along with that, as everyone does who's within the EU, and everyone wanted to protect their home industry. And I'm a 100% supporter of protecting home steel manufacture. It is of national interest. So the overall sort of goal of the government to protect UK steel production, I 100% agree with. So Tata, who's one of the major suppliers, is our largest supplier, and we support that business as much as we possibly can. It's of national interest. So this isn't a bashing UK steel mills or totally against the mills at all. We 100% support the mills. It's of national interest. The pandemic, semiconductor crisis, deglobalization just proves that that's what we should do, because without steel, we can't make anything. So the history, long established supply chain, tariffs and quotas came in. What's changed? So when the tariffs and quotas came in, the things which have changed, pandemic changed people's approach. So the government now are very de-risk with regards to globalization and keeping hold of manufacturing supply of things which are of national importance, like steel. So that's one thing. Automotive has reduced its volume. So from 2017 to today, car production and commercial vehicle production has halved. So where the mills had focused a lot of their capacity on supporting that high value added side of the supply chain, all of a sudden that's been removed. So they've got capacity. So the mills have got capacity. And then the other thing that's changed is this drive to sustainability. So as you'll know, Port Talbot is in a complete phase of redevelopment to introduce electric arc furnace. The government have supported that. So initially they've put in £500 million of support to support that transition. More recently, they've supported British Steel, both directly and indirectly with working capital and also orders in relation to rail. So they're invested a huge amount of money. So for the government's perspective, they've invested in UK steel mills. They want to see a return. They want to see those mills be profitable. So do we. No problem. The mills have had an established supply chain where they're focused on one area. That area is significantly reduced. So it's halved. So they've got capacity. And the quotas haven't changed. So at the moment, the quotas are still as high as they were when automotive was at its peak. So if you take a look in the supply chain, you could actually import enough steel to supply the whole of the UK demand now, which obviously doesn't make sense. So anybody looks at it understands the government perspective. We need to do something with the quotas because they're not representative of the current market. And from their perspective, they need to rebalance that. So that's what they want to do. They want to protect their investment in UK steel. They want to rebalance the quotas, and we agree with both of those. So we don't disagree with the emphasis of what they're trying to do. To do that, they employ a body called the TRA, and that gives them advice about the tariffs and quotas. So there was a consultation. The consultation started on the 28th of February. Everyone in the industry was made aware that there was a consultation about a proposed change to tariffs and quotas. So everyone was aware.
How much notice do you get when that consultation happened on the 28th? When are you finding out that this?
It's difficult because one of the things is there's so many people in the supply chain. How do they actually communicate? And they tend to communicate through the industry bodies. So for steel, we've got some very good industry bodies. So we've got the ISTA for the traders, CBM for the metal formers, NAS for the steel stockholders, and they're very good at informing their members. And the communication goes through mainly the trade bodies first, and then that's percolated down to the businesses. So I would say the communication to this front, everybody knew there was a consultation that was going to take place on the 28th of February, and they said what the consultation was about. Everyone understands the premise that the quotas are too high. They haven't changed. The market has reduced significantly. So nobody can argue with it, really. You understand the premise about what they're trying to do. So the announcement was on the 28th. There's going to be a consultation. The TRA then organised a number of meetings with interested parties such as ISTA and members, which was direct. I was party to one of the meetings, but also at the same time, UK Steel, which is effectively a lobbying agency for the mills, also was lobbying the government. And in the background, they've got roughly 40 MPs who are supporting UK Steel as a lobbying agency. So that at the moment is a big focus, and they've got a lot of power and a lot of sway in the government because they've got these 40 MPs on board. And UK Steel are pushing very hard for the mantra of supporting the mills. The TRA have a balanced approach to take a look at UK PLC and how the decisions on tariffs and quotas can affect the whole supply chain. So the government's got two things that are listening to: the TRA, which has a balanced approach, UK Steel, which is very mill focused and mill centric. So that consultation went on. There was opportunity for everyone to take part. You could go through the Gov portal and make your comments. Lots of people did. So over 20 companies made comments which were responded to by the TRA. And then on the 9th of June, the TRA came out with their recommendation to the government. So they make a recommendation to the minister, who's Jonathan Reynolds. And Jonathan Reynolds then represents and makes the decision for the Department of Trade. And on the 9th of June, they came out with a draft so everyone could review the draft. And then there's also an allowance for people to make comments based on the draft. And the draft was reasonable. It was a balanced approach. And if the draft had been implemented, I don't think anyone would be as outraged as they currently are. And the big thing that they're outraged by is the next two steps. So on the 9th of June, the TRA recommended a cap on some of the quotas, specifically in relation to Korea and Vietnam, who are large importers of coated steel into the UK. But the caps were within reasonable tolerance. They weren't too restrictive. And they also said there should be a deferment to allow the supply chain to adjust. There should be a deferment to the 1st of October. And it was very clear in their recommendations to Jonathan and the Department of Trade that if you didn't allow that deferment, there would be significant financial harm to the supply chain. And it was very clear. It's written in their recommendation, their draft to the department, to allow this period of deferment. Then on the 24th of June, Jonathan wrote in response to the recommendation from the TRA to say effectively that he was going to completely ignore the recommendation from the TRA. That's the first time, apart from during the pandemic, a TRA recommendation hasn't been taken by the Minister and the Department of Trade. And the only reason it didn't happen in the pandemic is because of a delay in the information that was being passed through and it was out of date. So they went back and did the consultation again and came up with another bit of advice which was observed. So it's massively unusual for that to happen. And the big thing which Jonathan did was as part of the recommendation, he basically went back to what UK Steel had lobbied for and ticked the box in every single thing that they'd asked for. So huge reduction in the quotas, specifically from Korea and Vietnam, to an unworkable level, which means you can't physically buy anymore from Korea or Vietnam, and no deferment period. And that means that everybody that had placed orders in good faith has material on the water or material currently being manufactured is now in a position effectively where, because the quota has been restricted to such a small level, that they'll have a tariff on top of the material. And I've estimated from what I can see, again, I'll say for category 4, that so far I've done a calculation and what I can see on the water and what's landed at UK ports, the bill is around £8 million for the supply chain. And the bill for steel and alloy alone, which I know is personal information, but I'm not unhappy to share it, is £440,000. And that's just something which is untenable really for us. It's not that we've done anything wrong. We placed orders in good faith. For us, we placed the orders actually in January and February before the consultation actually even started. So for us, it's a retrospective. We believe it's a retrospective tax imposition on us. And I'd encourage people to speak out. People who are on LinkedIn will have seen that I've spoken out quite vociferously on LinkedIn. I'm also going through the bodies and also our local MPs. So I have to say, Sarah Coombs, who's a Labour MP, who's the MP for West Bromwich, has been very good at putting our picture back to the Department of Trade as to where we are and trying to get them to reverse the decision. So far, there's been no movement on that. And given that the deadline's expired, I don't think there'll be movement, but she has been very proactive, so got to give her some credit with that. And then also ISTA and the CBM particularly have also been very proactive in lobbying and trying to get to the bottom of the situation with the government. So that's My wife said not to give an old man's rant, but that is sort of an old man's rant about the situation.
Do you suffer from any of these problems? Are you asking around your office trying to find a new supplier or source materials? Have you got aged or high-priced stock that you'd like to liquidate anonymously? Or would you like new business from customers that are guaranteed to pay you for your materials? If the answer to any of the above is yes, then you'll be pleased to know that the Metal Guys Talk Business podcast is sponsored by SteelBuy. SteelBuy are a digital platform revolutionising the way businesses trade metal products online. SteelBuy offers risk-free trading where sellers are guaranteed to be paid, and automated processing including certification, logistics and invoicing. The network of vetted buyers and sellers is continually growing, and it's all housed in an easy-to-use trading platform accessible on any device. The online business-to-business marketplace for products is rapidly gathering pace, and SteelBuy are ideally positioned to capture the changing demands of steel buyers. So check out SteelBuy today and be part of the future of metal trading. Now let's jump back into the podcast.
From a UK steel point of view, with our request to obviously your request as the other side, like, what advantage does it give UK Steel of what the request that they wanted that's been approved?
The ethos of what they wanted is to protect the mills and allow them to sell their capacity. The way that they've done it, so I agree with the objective. So the objective I agree with 100%. But the way that they've done it and not allowed a deferment for the supply chain to change its behaviour and whatever, that's where it's totally wrong. So what they are trying to achieve, I 100% agree with. No, don't disagree with that at all. And every meeting that when I stood up and gave my consultation back to the TRA, my first sentence was, I 100% agree with the protection of UK steel manufacturing. But we need to do it in a constructive way where it listens to the whole industry and supply chain. And at the moment, I feel that they've listened predominantly to the mill requests, and the mill requests haven't considered the full impact of the steel supply chain. And perversely, that's the supply chain that they want to be their customers. So in 3 months to 6 months' time, they want that supply chain to be buying their steel from them to use their capacity, and at the same time they've effectively imposed a huge cost on that supply chain. So I would encourage the mills to come out now, having known what the situation is, to say, look, we didn't intend this to happen, and actually promote a change and a deferment, because I think that would help their credibility with the supply chain that they're going to have to sell into or want to sell into.
And as of that, they haven't done that.
No, not at the moment. They haven't done that. No, but I would promote them to do that. You know, as a prospective customer, I would promote them to say, look, it's clear as what's happened in this situation, and I think the consequence of the tariffs that are being paid is maybe unconscious to people as to what that implication is and how it came around because of the length of the supply chain. But now they're aware of it, I think they should do something about it. Because as I said, in 3, 6, 9 months' time, they want us to be their customers. And at this moment in time, we've got a huge cost, which is effectively to protect them. So it's a very funny situation.
Tariffs and dumping duties. Anyone who's been in the metal industry for any period of time will have potentially fallen foul of them, or be aware of companies that have fallen foul of these kind of retrospective taxes, however you want to put it. Clearly, this seems unfair. Hence why I think that, you know, when we were looking at this and we were talking off air, you've had effectively a day to change your supply chain, which is ridiculous, really. Yeah. Like, what do you actually deem would be a fairer period of time to allow you to change? Because there must be demand for this material that you're buying, clearly, because you're buying it. So in an ideal situation, which we're not in, Paul, how do you believe this could have been done less poorly?
I think the original TRA recommendation was balanced and fair.
Can we go through that a little bit? Because obviously for people that are listening, they might not have.
Yeah, so the things which are specifically quite sort of like difficult for the supply chain to adjust to is Vietnam and Korea were very heavy suppliers, so supplying roughly a third of UK demand for coated steel. So too much, really. The UK Steel wanted a country cap effectively to be applied to Vietnam of Korea of 15% of the total demand, which basically took their tons down to basically one ship per quarter that we could have from Korea, Vietnam. And if you had that ship, you didn't know where somebody else was ordering another ship. So at any point in time, you would be subject to a tariff and quota because you don't control the supply chain. So basically it means you can't have anything.
Yeah,
Because if
it's
you're
very
doing
risky.
it, you're just gambling as to whether you pay a tariff. And the one thing, just to be precise, is the tariff isn't small. So the steel industry, particularly at my area, which is a steel service centre, works on very thin margins. The tariff is 25%. I work on profitability at about 1 to 2%. So 25% basically puts a huge cost and blows all of our profits and makes super losses for us. So the 25% tariff is very big. The limits which UK Steel were wanting to impose on Vietnam and Korea specifically are unworkable and very small. So the TRA said that there should be a 40% cap per country, which at least makes it workable, but then also a deferment period. So to allow the market to adjust and for all the material that had been ordered in good faith on customer contracts, for that material effectively to arrive. So they recognise that the lead time to purchase steel from the Asian supply is quite a long lead time. As I said, for us, we ordered in January, February for June, July, June, July arrival. So the lead time is quite long. So you need to give that deferment period to allow people effectively not to suffer the tariffs because they didn't have visibility of the tariffs. The one thing that's very disappointing, as Sarah's represented us back to the Department of Trade, their response was a very unusual response where they just basically said, well, yes, but the company knew there was a consultation taking place. So the end result of the consultation is at their risk. And that to me is a perverse response because what did they want us to do? Make no decisions and stop the steel supply chain while they had a consultation to work out whether we'd be paying tariffs. So it was an unworkable situation. So the deferment at least allows people to get everything that they're in, clear visibility of what the decision is. So, and people can plan and make their strategies based on that decision and they change their supply chains. So the deferment is the real crux of the matter for the industry. That's the real crux for everyone that's affected, is not having that deferment period. And then the limits being so small anyway makes effectively Vietnam and Korean supply impossible in the future.
Can I just dig into, just if I'm being thick here, so I'm sure someone else listening might think the same thing here. You said here 40% cap per country and then the deferment. So what I'm interested in, what does that 40% cap per country mean, if you can just boil that down into layman's terms?
If you take a look at the level of steel that was being imported, so I think at the peak it was 180,000 tons from Vietnam. I might be a little bit out on the figures, and Korea was around 120,000 tons.
Is this an annual or
annual?
Yeah,
annual import, and then they wanted to restrict that down to 15% of both of the import levels. So effectively, they reduced it down to around 20,000 tons, which is a ship load.
Yeah.
Korea's a very controlled market. They give people licenses for export, so that might be workable. Vietnam isn't a controlled market, so there's plenty of mills with huge outputs who can sell to anybody. So at any point in time, if you decide to buy from Vietnam and somebody else decides to buy from Vietnam, you'd probably be immediately into breaking the quota and into an immediate tariff situation.
So when you're saying like 20,000 tons, so yeah, like just one for
per quarter.
Per quarter.
Yeah.
Now, I think the issue is you said there as well is that you can't buy, and again, people that are listening who obviously know this, forgive me for asking this, but just to make it clear, when you're looking to buy, the risk that you've got is dependent on when your ship sails and dependent on when your ship hits Felixstowe or wherever in the UK. If the tariff has all been taken for that quarter,
the
quota, by the day before or 2 days before,
you immediately
just get slapped with your figure. So it makes it very difficult
Yeah,
as a business
one
to
of
place.
one of the other judgments in the Jonathan's reiteration of the TRA advice was currently, if the quota hasn't been exhausted for a quarter, you can roll it over. So in the Jonathan's decision via the DBT, now that isn't the case. So there's no rollover of quotas at all. So if you haven't used it, it's gone. But just to explain quotas, it's every quarter there's an amount of material that you're allowed to import. Because you haven't got visibility of everybody's supply chain, you don't know. But you can look at a lot of information to say how much of the quota has been used at any point in time. And then it's up to you when you clear the goods. So if you get to the end of the quarter and you think it's very close to hitting the quota, so potentially you'd have to pay a tariff, you can wait. So you wait to the first day of the following quarter and then you clear your material, because then you start that quarter's volume running because of the volume, and then you start running. So you can wait to clear the goods. And a lot of people do that, particularly the traders. They'll be in a situation when they measure the quota and think, oh, there's a risk that it might breach the quota limit, therefore I'll clear the goods in the next quarter, which creates a little bit of a gap in the supply chain. But the supply chain's got enough volume in it to cater for that, so you can have that. But the thing is that beforehand, the quotas were so large, as I said, they were much bigger than required, that you never had that situation. We've never been in a situation where measurement of that quotas to such a precise level was so important. Yet on the 1st of July, when the decision physically in law was made on the 30th of June, all of a sudden those quotas were completely collapsed with no notice. And then basically everybody was in a position, and every boat that arrives after the 1st of July is 25% quota for that quarter.
And how are they getting on with customs entry? Because it doesn't sound like there's much time there to do this.
Now this is going to sound like an old man's rant.
Okay, well, just calm down.
The Department of Trade have made the decision the HMRC are responsible for the customs clearance. So what happened was everybody waited, and on the 1st of July, everybody cleared an amount of material because it was the most efficient way to reduce the tariff that you were going to pay. The HMRC systems could not calculate the tariff that you were due to pay. So they immediately suspended, because they're not set up to do that calculation. So they suspended the tariffs and quotas. They allowed people to custom clear the goods, which meant they were allowed to come into the port. Physically, you're allowed to take it out of the port, but under law, you're not actually allowed to process that material and sell it on until you've paid the tariff and duty. And that's currently suspended to the 1st of August. So I don't know how somebody manages that. But the current situation, if you actually physically read it, is you're not allowed to process that material and sell it on. You're allowed to clear the port and take it from ports. But what's happened is because the volume that people want to clear is huge, the ports are absolutely stuffed full of steel, and they're using external storage warehouses. They're block stowing steel, which means then getting coils out of the ports is very difficult. So there's a huge delay in the supply chain. And also because you can't get the steel out, the ports want you to take the steel out, so the storage charges if you don't take it out. So as well as having a delay, as well as having the tariffs, then there's also probably going to be an increase in storage charges that you're paying at ports.
Because I never understood how cheap, because I always used to look at these demurrage charges or whatever they call them when material come in. And when I was bringing things in, I was getting slapped for fees. It was a daily rate that you just had to get it out that quick. And I think being completely naive to the steel sector when we first kind of were getting into it, I couldn't believe just the volume of material that you guys have got sat at ports.
Yeah, it's
potentially protracted periods of time.
It's hundreds of thousands of tons.
Yeah.
So the ports are set up to hold it, but obviously what the ports want to do is clear that material as quick as possible. So yes, they get the charge, because every ship that comes in is where they make their money.
Correct.
So when they're paying the demurrage, etc., that's where they make their money. Then they hold the material, and they want you to take that material as quick as possible. And if you don't take the material as quick as possible, then for them to make more money, they need to charge you the storage, because they can't get ships in to fill the warehouse again to get their charges for their demurrage and offloading and transport. So in a lot of instances, the ports are responsible for some of the transport to the customers as well. So in their instance, it's like an airport really. They want as many planes in, as many passengers off as possible. They want as many boats in, as many coils off as possible to make money for the port. And at the moment, the ports are completely log jammed. So there's been a huge amount of material that's been cleared at the same time. All has gone into warehousing and extra warehousing. Boats have been redirected around the UK because some ports are completely full. So now we're redirecting ships to other ports. So the supply chain is in complete disarray.
It's knackered, isn't it, as well? Because even when it tidies up, like just trying to get your material out, the backlog, there's only so many vehicles, there's only so many they can load, there's only so much material you can physically move.
The difficulty is bulk storage. So as soon as you put something into bulk storage, I want the coil which is at the back.
Yeah.
That's
I've
the
seen
coil
it,
I
yeah.
want. How do I get that coil out from a port position? They can't, so they take the first coil and take that out. That coil at the back is the one that you're paying storage on. The first one's probably the last one to arrive, which you're not paying storage on.
Yeah.
So it's from the port perspective, it's been very difficult. The ports have been very supportive. So that, you know, in trying to get the ships in, the storage, they've been vocal with their MPs about the situation, which will get worse. So as you get into this in this quarter, nobody will want to port a ship. So come the 1st of October, basically a whole quarter's pent up supply will want to be cleared and landed through the ports, and the ports are just going to be completely log jammed.
How long do you reckon this will take to be resolved?
Months and months and months. So I think there was an anticipation from the mills that after this was put in place, they'd cut off some supply, they'd restrict the quotas, which would give people the opportunity to purchase from them. But actually now the whole system is completely constipated. So the ports are constipated. The supply chain doesn't know what to charge its customers because currently there isn't an estimation of what the tariff is going to be for goods that have arrived on the 1st of July, but that's not fixed. So how do we know what to charge our customers based on that cost that's due to arrive? And then how in the supply chain, who pays that cost? So is it the mill who've supplied the material? Is it us as the service centre, the trader or the steel stockholder who sits between them and a processor that could be a section roller, a fabricator, whatever, or the end customer who pays that tariff that's been imposed? And at the moment, the whole supply chain is running through lots of consultations as to how we get this cost through the supply chain. Because for one individual element of the supply chain, it's almost untenable. It's too large.
Are you hopeful that it will get resolved? Do you believe it will get resolved?
It has to get resolved because at the end of the day, there are customers there with demands for the steel. So it has to get resolved, but it will take, I estimate it will take between 6 to 9 months for it all to settle back down. It's going to be a long-term program, and that's because the supply chain is so long, and that's the bit I think in the overall consultation process, the knowledge from the people involved at the DBT and the government, that's the bit which they've missed. And from a mill perspective, it's something that they don't really have to know. It's the other side, and in the consultation process, UK Steel, the Steel Forum has no downstream steel manufacturers, suppliers, service centres as part of that consultation process. It's completely missed. It's all mill focused.
This episode is brought to you by Nero Pipeline Connections, the go-to supplier for stainless steel tube, fittings, valves and pipeline products across the UK. Whether you're in process, manufacturing or engineering, Nero makes sourcing simple. They've got over 12,000 products in stock, from BSP, fittings to flanges, valves and fasteners, and all are available for next day delivery. With ISO 9001 accreditation and an experienced team, they're built for businesses that can't afford downtime. So check out nero.co.uk to explore their full range. And now, back to the pod. We've had previous with issues when importing materials and
you want
systems.
Me to rant again now?
Yeah. I'm just like, while you're on your box,
Okay.
do you want me to add another soapbox?
Yeah, so
But yeah, let's talk historically, because I think that's the thing. Sometimes you don't want to speculate because people are like, well, you're just doing it to kind of make noise for the sake of it, but there's been problems previously. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the historic issues and how that has really taken a long time to pan out? Because that's my worry when we look at this, that this could be another problem and another load of cost.
Yeah, so this is the second sort of huge cost into UK steel supply chain. So the first one was around the Brexit period. So as we went through Brexit, effectively all the imports of steel from the EU all of a sudden became attracting tariff and quota, particularly quota. There was no real tariffs because the quotas were so large for European imports. And that was something that the supply chain wasn't used to, although the agencies that we use, the import agents, have a long history of importing steel from all around the world that have tariffs and quotas. And what's happened retrospectively is the HMRC have taken a look at the actions of the agents and said that the imports had been done incorrectly. So the industry was hit, again, we estimate, a £35 million hit, where the HMRC has come back to traders, steel service centres, stockholders to say that the imports they made over that period were incorrectly cleared through customs because they'd used something called a DTY override. I can tell you it's harder to use a DT override than it is to actually clear the goods correctly. So at the moment, we've got a group of companies have all been affected who've come together. We've put just shy of £1 million together to effectively sue the HMRC. So we're taking them to an appeal tribunal. We've got a barrister involved. I'm part of the steering group to do that. NAS, ISTA, CBM, British Stainless Steel Association have all been supportive. And that just shows you how bad the situation is when you've got to get that number of people together to actually stand up to in this instance, the HMRC. This is the Department of Trade, but this instance was the HMRC, to say we totally disagree with what they've done. And their compliance, legislation, everything that they've done, from my eyes, is wrong. They're sitting behind a situation of very much like the postmaster defence that says the system worked. And I think as they found out, their defence in the postmaster situation was the system worked. Our attack is the system didn't work, which is why the agents who were very experienced had to clear in the way that they had to clear. And there was clear advice from agents from the HMRC. At the time, pandemic didn't help. So a lot of them were working from home. It was telephone advice, not written communication, and there were broken communication chains. But fundamentally, the system wasn't working effectively because it was overloaded. And also, the HMRC knew it. So I did a freedom of information request. And in the period that was affected, the use of DTY override code went from an average per year of just below 1,000 to well over 5,000. So anybody looking at how the ports were operating and clearing goods would have seen, hold on, this is a problem. And at the time, they did nothing about it. They didn't inform people. They waited for a period. Then they informed people, but their communication channel was really poor in the way that they informed people to say, look, we think you've cleared the goods incorrectly. It's you've used DTY override. You shouldn't have done that. And that would have given us time to retrospectively go back and take a look at it. And what happened was actually all the time frames where you can retrospectively go back and address the problems because of their communication had passed. So effectively, you're in a very bizarre situation where you couldn't go back and address. And even their actions, they've never fined anybody. They've never given anybody a penalty, which you would do for any non-observance of tax. That would be their first thing to say, well, I'm going to fine you. I'm going to give you a penalty because you hadn't observed what you should have done. And they haven't done that. So even their actions, they know that we as the steel UK supply chain were not trying to take advantage of tariffs and quotas and literally not follow the system to bring goods in, which would have been subject to a tariff. And when you look at it, there was huge amounts of volume left on the quotas.
Was it just because there was just so much material coming in at that point? Like, why did the system, why was it not fit for purpose at that particular point, Paul?
The system being fit for purpose, I don't know technically all the reasons why, but yes, there was a huge volume increase. But at the same time, there was a consultation 2 years before where the HMRC had actually said that they're going to replace the chief system at the time with the system called CDS. and the chief system already been identified as not fit for purpose. So they'd identified it not fit for purpose, and they'd allocated it for replacement, and that replacement and documented it, and that replacement had been delayed due to a longer implementation phase than they expected. So they, in their own communication, they've said that the chief system wasn't fit for purpose and they were going to replace it. The Brexit had a huge spike in volume, new sources through different ports as well. There was a huge increase in the number of staff in the clearing agents, which is one of the things which the HMRC says, look, there was a huge increase. They were inexperienced. They didn't follow the system which they should have followed. Well, actually, they were in agents that had been clearing material for years and years and years, and not all of them were inexperienced. And overall, to my knowledge, there were 29 clearing agents affected. All 29 couldn't have been naive about the situation. And then obviously we've got other bits of information which I don't want to discuss because it's part of the real detail of that proves our point.
But surely, a vessel arrives with a commodity which has a code and a weight and a client. That's kind of it.
Yeah. In very simple terms, that's the way it works. But there's, without going into too much detail, there are some things around that. Some of the codes hadn't had the tariffs and the quotas uploaded. There's some admittance from people that didn't happen for a period, but it was only a very short period. It wasn't the full period affected, so we can't rely on that. But that is the simple. And then everyone who's in the clearing agents were saying, well, they're putting the information in and it's coming up with an error message. And it's not allowing us to clear. And there was clear instruction at that point in time. I think everybody who's listing and everyone that make sure the ports, that goods travel through the ports.
Yeah.
There was a clear instruction at top level in briefings from the government to say that we need to keep the ports flowing. And that was just an undercurrent from everybody to say, keep the ports flowing. So they're having error messages. They knew that you can use DTY override. They used DTY override. Nobody from the port agents or the HMRC had correspondence at that point in time to say you've cleared it incorrectly. They waited for a very long period of time to then reflect back and say, look, you've cleared it incorrectly. Now, because you haven't complied strictly with the clearance protocol, you're now subject to a tariff. Because it's not been cleared in the correct way. You've avoided the quota, therefore the tariff immediately applies.
Just to play devil's advocate for a minute, forgive me. Obviously, there was a lot of material coming through. Like, we can't deny that there was a huge amount. So what was the real issue? Was it that people were being charged who shouldn't have been charged? Some people were not being charged because of like timing and things like that. How did it become so problematic, Paul? And were there like big losers and big winners at that point?
There were hundreds of people affected, so it's not like the big losers are the people who are the big volume importers, because effectively it wasn't clear to them, and because of the volume they import, all of a sudden they've got a huge tariff bill to pay. But that by default you'd say they're the big losers. But as we've gone through and asked for information from people, we're up to probably 300 people that have been affected by exactly the same request. Some as little as a few £100, some as high as a few £1,000,000. So, as you know, there's the whole industry has been affected, but affected a long time after the event. It's not clear to everybody, and people rely on the port agents to clear the goods correctly. And funnily, the law and the legislation says it's your responsibility. You should check every single clearance paper. People don't check every paper that they rely on the professionals who are doing it on their behalf. And that is a little bit of a defence from the HMRC that said, well, you're responsible, you should have checked every paper. And if we'd have checked every paper, they said, hold on, we're using the DTY override. Have we got clearance from the HMRC to use the override? And ask the question at that point in time. But the goods were just cleared. So goods went through the ports, they were cleared. HMRC didn't come back in any time at all to the agents or the service centres, traders who were clearing goods to say, look, we believe you've cleared this incorrectly. You might want to take a look at your paperwork and go back and retrospectively input the commodity code and to get the correct tariff quota allocation. That never happened. It happened months, years later, when all the deadlines that you could go back and retrospectively had passed.
Painful.
Very painful, which is why I've been working to try and gather people together, get the information all together, and then we formulated this group, as I said, and we put a lot of money behind it. And interesting, the bit of paper you keep looking at is
I'm waiting. Well, there's three bits of highlighter on it. I think we need to get that on camera, Jacob.
No, we can't get this bit of paper on camera. It's the next legal challenge. So
right.
the challenge that we've got together was against the HMRC. This is a challenge against the Department of Trade and specifically Jonathan Reynolds. So this is a protocol letter that will go out this week. The next thing we're going to move on to is judicial review, because I think the decision he's made is completely one-sided and hasn't taken a fair representation of the whole steel supply chain. So I would encourage everybody that's been affected is to stand out, communicate with their local MP, and put stuff on LinkedIn and put stuff into their industry magazines, etc., and actually make a fuss about it, because I think it's totally wrong. That's my perspective.
It'd be nice for the UK mills also to give some kind of backing as well.
I would encourage that. From my perspective, it makes, as I'll say it again, at some stage they want the people affected to be their customers, and I'm one of those people that 100% agree with that we should support the UK mill. I think this is an inadvertent consequence of trying to rush through some decision making without the full information, even though they did have the information in the draft that was given by the TRA that said there would be a financial consequence if the deferment period wasn't allowed. But I think it's an inadvertent mistake. So if it is an inadvertent mistake, let's try and reverse it. Let's get there to a position that everyone says, look, do we really want to impose all of this cost on the supply chain when actually we're not going to buy an extra ton because we've already bought the material? We're not going to double buy it. We're not going to go back to the UK mill now and say, oh, by the way, we want to buy material. Until this material is consumed through the supply chain, there won't be an order on the UK mill. And when we want to put an order on the UK mill, we'll have suffered a huge cost in the interim. So we're going to be there with a bad taste in our mouth, going to the mills to say, look, we understand why you wanted this. We agree with it. We don't disagree with it at all. We understand why you want to be secure, but you can't kick us in one hand and the next minute want to hug us and say you're our best friend and can you buy some steel from us? And that'll be the position that they're in. So I think they should look at themselves and say, look, we should do something about this.
Is there the ability within the UK mills, these UK mills, are they going to be able to do the tonnages realistically that you would require? If you just had to turn the tap off down to the current quotas, they can do this?
Yeah. This capacity in the to get to the nth degree, because somebody will pick me up because of the detail. There's some grades and some materials they can't do. So specifically, there would be some things which you'd always have to import, but fundamentally they can meet the volume. As I said, they focused all of their capacity for the high value added, and that's not completely disappeared, but the market is completely reduced in automotive by half. That gives them a huge capacity then to supply this part of the marketplace, which before is less profitable for them, so they haven't looked to supply this marketplace.
Can they supply it then competitively? Because that was the initial point that you started.
No. Now I'll repeat Steve. So Steve Morley of the CBM has been a great advocate for this. The real fundamental issue is why is the imported steel that has to travel halfway around the world
so much cheaper
than what we can produce in the UK? So employers' national insurance doesn't help anybody. My bill was £250,000 at Steel and Alloy for the national insurance increase. But the massive thing that the government could change is the energy costs, both electricity and gas. And that's fundamentally, the UK has got one of the highest energy costs around the world, and specifically in Europe, it's one of the highest energy costs. So when you're competing with a lower energy cost over here, which is one of the huge elements that you're putting into the manufacture of steel, and you've got a very high one over here, that's fundamentally the issue the government should be looking at. So if you want to secure this supply chain over here with UK steel, you've got to look at its cost base and reduce its cost base.
I don't know if you can talk about it, but I'll ask anyway. So for galv, the commodity that we're talking about here that's been affected, what kind of uplift do you think the market will have to suffer to buy these commodities now if we do turn the tap off for the current supply chain? How much are you going to have to put your price up? Because when you're talking about we're only making a couple of single figure percentages, there's a 25% tariff on anything over this one boat.
What it'll do is it'll effectively, the reason why people were buying large volumes through Vietnam and Korea, where they were effectively the lowest cost suppliers in the marketplace. And what it will do is it will just, like people, Eye of Sauron, will just move their direction to where's the next cheapest and what quota and tariff is for there. And then what's the next cheapest and what the tariff and quota is for there. And what's the next cheapest. And effectively what you'll do is you'll get a weighted average cost for the marketplace from Egyptian supply, Turkish supply, Indian supply have all got quotas, European supply, UK supply, and you'll get a weighted average, and that's where the market will balance out, but it'll take time.
Well, this is where we see all the issues though, don't we? Because say Egypt, for instance, and again, I don't want to be slanderous here, but their production is not probably to the same level because it won't have been done for so many years at the same volumes with the same staff and the same infrastructure and all the things that come. So effectively the supply chain becomes poorer potentially because you just can't get the volume in from these new sources quick enough. And there's that period of time, plus you then get people playing the game and moving material backwards and forwards. And there's all sorts of problems that generally occur that I've seen historically with dumping tariffs, which I'm guessing will be
there are as well
risk.
Consultations going on about anti-dumping as well at the same time as we're talking.
It's good to know, Paul.
So there's another thing coming. So anti-dumping will come in. I think UK Steel are now very vocal about 1st of January and reducing the quotas even more on the 1st of January. So market beware, it's going to get worse. So there'll be a position where we think there's going to be further movements on the 1st of January, which will again be a problem if there's no deferment period to react to. But fundamentally, the government's got to address the cost of UK manufacture. And for me, and for a lot of people who are in the industry, the big thing there is the energy price. Not just the energy price, but the energy price is a big thing that they can do for that. And then the market will balance out. So, for high value added products, you'll buy them from probably a higher value, better quality service mill. And for the lower value commodity, you'll have to pick from a number of mills. But to be honest, most of the mills that we deal with now around the world, the quality of the product we get is very good. So you can't knock the quality of the product. So everyone we deal with as a supplier, as all of our customers will know, we produce, our quality of service is very good, but their quality of material is also very good. So it's not as if we're competing with, something which is low quality. It isn't low quality. What happens is it's produced in a much different standard with regards to health and safety and things like that, legislation which is around producing, and then also a tax infrastructure which is a lot less than the UK.
I think it's just often the volume increase. If a country all of a sudden gets a spike and it's like, right, we want you to produce 4x what you've been producing last month. It's just too much, isn't it? You know yourself, if your order book just went through the roof, it's operationally it's a problem.
The supply chain won't be established. The ports won't operate. The ships won't have, because the ships will operate like buses. As they're going around, they do the same route as they're travelling around. So the supply chain won't be there. The mills, we won't have the relationship with the mills. If you do have quality problems, it will be difficult to resolve with the mills because you won't have those relationships. So it'll take time to establish those links, but as you've cut off one segment of the market, another one will see an opportunity to say, well, we can become that segment of the market. Obviously, the UK mills want them to be the opportunity. They've got to, but to do that, they've got to basically address the real elephant in the room, which is their manufacturing cost. The only way that physically that they're going to get all of the capacity that they want is if the tariffs are the quotas, not tariffs, are taken down to a really small level, and then they've got all the capacity to supply what the UK market needs. But if there's quota levels there, people would use those quotas because invariably the imports are cheaper than the UK manufacture, and that's what the government's got to address. If they want to secure their investment in UK steel, they have to make sure that UK steel is a lower cost than it currently is manufacturing base. That's what they need to do.
I think that's a very good way to end the podcast. Was there anything that we've missed or anything you wanted to mention that we haven't given you the opportunity to to talk about?
No, the thing for me is I think everyone should get involved in the discussion. There doesn't have to just be one or two voices which are standing out. The more that we all shout about the situation, I think the more it'll get addressed and looked at. So the more possibility there is of actually getting a good resolution from the situation that we're currently in. And then I suppose the other thing is on a very biased basis for me is everyone's got to look at the supply chain and say, look, there aren't individuals or smaller companies within the supply chain that can suffer this cost. So we've got to be very pragmatic about pushing this cost through the supply chain.
Thank you for sticking around till the end of the podcast. To help this channel grow, if you could like it, share it with any of your colleagues or people who are in the metals or engineering or manufacturing sectors, that would be great. Also, you might feel like you're the perfect guest for our podcast to tell your story of your career, or maybe there's someone in your network who you think would be great for us to interview. If you want to get in contact with myself or Peter Comerford, that would be great. We'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Steelbuy, as well as Nero Pipeline. Thanks for watching.